Welcome to my BNB Glow channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thomas Forrester had always thought that he understood the rules of love, betrayal, and redemption in Los Angeles, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm that awaited him when the curtain was finally pulled back on Daphne's secret identity, an unraveling that would shake his foundation, test his loyalty to his family, and challenge his very sense of judgment. For weeks, the mysterious Daphne had been an intoxicating presence in Thomas's life, someone who seemed to understand the fractured pieces of his soul in a way few ever could, someone who appeared to see past the mistakes of his past and into the man he was desperately trying to become, a man worthy of redemption, a man striving to be more than just Ridge Forrester's son or Hope Logan's former obsession. Daphne's laughter had been like a melody that softened his edges, her touch had reassured him when doubt crept in, and her words of encouragement had made him believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he was capable of not only healing himself but also of inspiring love that was untainted by manipulation or obsession. Yet behind her gentle gaze and poised demeanor, there existed a truth so powerful that it threatened to rip apart the fragile balance Thomas had been clinging to. It began with whispers, subtle inconsistencies in Daphne's stories about her past, tiny cracks in the facade that Thomas had been too blinded by desire and hope to notice at first. She spoke of family back east but never named them, of a career in design that had supposedly kept her traveling yet never produced any tangible record in the fashion industry's gossip mills, a curious absence in a world where everyone knew everyone's business. The more Thomas allowed himself to fall under her spell, the more fate seemed to conspire to expose the reality he had been unwilling to confront. When Hope had first expressed concern, suggesting that Daphne might not be who she claimed, Thomas had brushed it aside as lingering mistrust, convinced that Hope still doubted his ability to choose someone healthy, someone right for him. But deep down, even Thomas could not ignore the gnawing suspicion that he was once again walking blindly into a trap of his own making. The truth came crashing down on an afternoon meant to be filled with celebration, when the Forresters gathered at the mansion for a dinner that was supposed to honor new beginnings and second chances. Daphne, poised and radiant in a sleek black dress that hugged her frame, seemed perfectly at ease among the Forrester elite, laughing with Eric, exchanging polite words with Brooke, and even charming Steffi's skeptical eyes for a moment. Thomas had never felt prouder to have her by his side, a symbol that he had finally found someone who believed in him without agenda. Yet the air shifted when Liam arrived late, his eyes narrowing the instant they landed on Daphne. The room grew thick with unspoken tension as Liam's jaw clenched and his fists curled at his sides, and it was in that silence that the bombshell detonated. Liam's voice was sharp, cutting through the pleasantries like a blade. "Her name isn't Daphne. That's not who she is." Gasps rippled through the room, and all eyes turned toward the woman Thomas had sworn was his future. Thomas's heartbeat thundered in his ears, his throat tightening as he forced out a single question. "What are you talking about, Liam?" The look in Liam's eyes was one of both triumph and warning, as if he had been waiting for this very moment to reveal what he had uncovered. "She's not Daphne. Her real name is Serena Dupree, and she has ties to one of the most dangerous scandals this family has ever been caught in." The words echoed like a death knell, and Thomas felt the ground beneath him begin to crumble. In that instant, the beautiful, enigmatic woman beside him transformed from a promise of redemption into a walking reminder of how easily he could be deceived, how vulnerable his heart truly was. Serena Dupree, the name triggered memories of tabloid whispers, of a scandal involving corporate espionage, stolen designs, and a shadowy figure who had once been linked to both Bill Spencer's empire and rival fashion houses overseas. The revelation sent Brooke's hand flying to her mouth, Ridge's eyes narrowing with fury, and Hope's voice breaking as she whispered, "Oh my God, Thomas." But it was Thomas who felt the deepest cut, his chest aching with the realization that once again, his search for love had led him straight into betrayal. He turned to the woman he had believed was Daphne, searching her face for denial, for any explanation that could undo the wreckage Liam's words had caused. Yet the look in her eyes was not one of guilt, it was one of resignation, of someone who had carried a burden too long and had finally been exposed. "It's true," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady enough to shatter every illusion Thomas had clung to. "I'm not Daphne. I never was. I'm Serena Dupree, and I came back to Los Angeles because there are things you need to know, things that could destroy your family if I don't make them right." The room erupted into chaos, Ridge demanding answers, Brooke questioning her motives, Steffi insisting this was another trap meant to target the Forresters, and Hope standing frozen, torn between compassion and alarm. But Thomas could only hear the echo of those words, "I'm not Daphne. I never was." His mind replayed every kiss, every whispered promise, every moment of vulnerability he had shared with her, now colored by the knowledge that the woman he thought he knew was nothing more than a mask hiding a dangerous truth. And yet, even in the midst of betrayal, part of him could not ignore the desperation in her tone, the way her eyes pleaded with him to see beyond the lie to the woman beneath. For Thomas Forrester, the discovery of Daphne's true identity was not just the unmasking of a lover, it was the beginning of a battle for truth, trust, and the survival of his family's legacy, a battle that would test every lesson he thought he had learned and every ounce of strength he had left to give. The air in the Forrester mansion, usually thick with the scent of expensive perfume, old money, and whispered secrets, seemed to grow still and heavy, as if the very house was holding its breath in anticipation of the seismic shift about to rupture its foundation. Thomas Forrester, a man whose own life had been a tapestry woven with threads of obsession, manipulation, and a desperate, often misguided, quest for redemption, moved through the opulent rooms with a singular purpose, his mind consumed not by fabric or fashion designs, but by the enigmatic figure who had so effortlessly woven herself into the very heart of his family. Daphne, the sweet, unassuming, almost ethereal presence who had appeared from the shadows of his father's grief, a soothing balm on the raw wound of Hope's absence, was not who she claimed to be. This was not a vague suspicion born of his own paranoid history, but a cold, hard certainty that had begun as a tiny crack in the facade of her perfection and had now widened into a chasm threatening to swallow them all. It had started with nothing more than a flicker, a dissonant note in the symphony of her impeccable story, a reference to a childhood detail that didn't quite align with the timeline she had presented, a little too much knowledge about a private family matter that had never been discussed in her presence, a fleeting look in her eyes that was not one of gentle compassion but of calculated assessment, a look he recognized all too well because he had seen it in the mirror during his darkest days. Where others saw kindness, he began to see strategy. Where they saw a healing touch, he saw the careful placement of a pawn on a chessboard, and it was this unnerving reflection of his own past self that propelled him forward, driving him into the digital underworld, spending late nights chasing ghosts through public records and social media archives that she seemed to have meticulously scrubbed clean, which in itself was the most damning evidence of all. No one was that pure, that untraceable. Especially not someone who claimed a history of humble origins. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a dramatic, single document but a puzzle piece, a tiny fragment of a photograph from a university alumni page buried deep within a forgotten server, a group shot of a graduating class where a face, younger, harder around the edges, with a glint of ambition rather than manufactured serenity in her eyes, was unmistakably hers, but attached to a different name, a different life. Cassandra. The name echoed in his mind, a key turning in a lock he hadn't even known was there. Cassandra Black, a woman with a history of academic brilliance shadowed by accusations of ethical flexibility, a woman who had vanished from her own life years ago, leaving behind a trail of minor scandals and disappointed mentors. The pieces, once they started to connect, did so with a terrifying, inevitable logic. A forgotten news snippet about an intern who had allegedly manipulated patient records at a private clinic, a connection to a known corporate espionage firm that specialized in industrial intelligence, a blurred image from a security camera at a rival fashion house months ago, just before a key Forrester design was mysteriously leaked. It wasn't about his father at all. It was never about Ridge. The target, the ultimate prize, was Forrester Creations itself, and his father's vulnerable heart had merely been the most convenient door through which to enter. Confrontation was not a decision he made lightly, it was a storm that had been building within him, a tempest of betrayal, rage, and a shocking, protective ferocity he hadn't felt since Douglas was threatened. He found her not in the grand living room or the design office, but in the quiet solarium, surrounded by his mother's orchids, her back to him as she gazed out at the Los Angeles skyline, a picture of perfect peace. The contrast between the serene image and the vile truth he now held in his hands was so profound it stole his breath for a moment. His voice, when it finally came, was not the thunderous roar he had expected but a low, controlled, and dangerously calm vibration that seemed to shake the leaves on the plants. Cassandra. The name hung in the humid air between them. She didn't startle, she didn't gasp, her shoulders merely stiffened almost imperceptibly, and after a heartbeat of dead silence, she turned slowly, and the transformation was chilling. The soft, doe-like innocence evaporated from her eyes, replaced by a flat, cool assessment. The sweet, placid smile was gone, leaving behind a thin, knowing line of a mouth. The mask had not just slipped, it had shattered on the floor between them, and the woman who looked back at him was a stranger, and yet, in her calculating gaze, terrifyingly familiar. "Thomas," she said, and her voice was different too, lower, devoid of the melodic warmth, now just a tool for communication. "I suppose it was only a matter of time. You were always the most perceptive of them. Flawed, but perceptive." The acknowledgement, devoid of denial or fear, was more shocking than any lie could have been. She confirmed everything with a chilling lack of remorse, outlining the operation not as a personal vendetta but as a business transaction, a long-term infiltration commissioned by a conglomerate desperate to acquire Forrester creations and needing leverage, internal weakness, a scandal so profound it would force a vulnerable sale. She had studied them, learned their traumas, Ridge's grief, Steffi's strength, Hope's moral rigidity, and his own, Thomas's, volatile history. She had weaponized their own emotional baggage against them, presenting herself as the perfect antidote to the pain they all carried. "Grief makes people so wonderfully predictable," she stated, her voice clinical, as if she were discussing a chemical reaction. "It creates a void, and a void will always be filled. I simply made sure I was the one to fill it." The sheer scale of the deception, the cold, surgical precision with which she had exploited his father's love, manipulated his family's emotions, and made a mockery of their attempts to heal, ignited a fury in him so pure it was blinding. He saw not just her betrayal, but his own reflected in her actions, the lies he had told Hope, the schemes he had constructed around Douglas, the way he had tried to manipulate reality to fit his own desires. He was staring into a distorted mirror of his own darkest self, and the horror of that recognition was a more effective punishment than any prison sentence could ever be. This was his legacy, the shadow he had cast, and now it had taken form and walked back into their lives to finish what he had started. But within that horrifying realization sparked something new, a resolve forged in the fire of his own past failures. He would not be that man anymore. He would not allow this poison to spread. He was no longer the villain of the story, he would be the guardian. He took a step forward, his presence filling the room, no longer the suspicious son but the defender of his home. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more threatening than any shout. "You will walk out of this house, you will get in your car, and you will disappear from Los Angeles forever. You will never contact my father, you will never come near my family again." A faint, condescending smile touched her lips. "Or what, Thomas? You'll tell them? Expose me? Go ahead. Tell your father the woman he loves, the woman who pulled him from the brink of despair, is a fraud. Show him the evidence. It will destroy him. The embarrassment, the humiliation, it will be a scandal that rocks the company stock. Your sister will never trust his judgment again. Your mother will use it as ammunition for years. You'll be responsible for shattering him all over again. Is that the noble path? To break your father's heart to satisfy your own need for justice?" She had planned for this, too. She had woven her defense into the very fabric of their emotional vulnerabilities, making the truth a weapon that would harm the victims more than the perpetrator. But Thomas, for the first time, saw the trap clearly. He saw the old Thomas, the manipulator, in her words, and he knew the way out. "No," he said, a grim smile finally touching his own lips. I'm not going to tell them. You are. Her composure faltered for the first time, a crack in her icy armor. You're going to sit down with my father, and you're going to tell him everything. You're going to confess it all, of your own free will. You're going to break your own narrative. She laughed, a short, harsh sound. And why would I ever do that? Thomas moved closer, until he was looking down at her, his eyes blazing with a truth she could not manipulate. Because the alternative is far worse for you. I know who you're working for. I know about the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the contact at Jackie M. I have it all. If you walk away now, if you vanish, I bury it. If you force my hand, if I have to be the one to expose you, I won't just send it to my family. I will send every single piece of evidence I have to every fashion outlet, every financial regulator, and to the specific individuals you're working for. I will make sure you are not just a failed operative, but a liability they cannot afford to leave unattended. You think my family is a threat? You have no idea what kind of enemies you will have if I unleash this. Your employers don't take kindly to loose ends who attract that kind of attention. So, you have a choice, Cassandra. You can walk away quietly and start over somewhere else, or you can burn in a fire of your own making. But you will not burn my family with you. The silence that followed was absolute. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by the first genuine emotion he had ever seen on her, raw, primal fear. She had played a high-stakes game, betting that the family's emotions were their greatest weakness. She had not bet on Thomas Forrester, a reformed sinner who knew every trick in the devil's playbook, using his hard-won knowledge of darkness to finally protect the light. She had not bet on the Guardian.